Run by Innovate Awarding on Endpoint Assessment. My name is Kathy Smith and my colleague Andy McNeil will be taking us through the assessment model for 3 standards today: Customer Service, Team Leader Supervisor and Operations Departmental Manager. We have record numbers on this webinar this week, 136 at the last count, a mix of employers, training providers of all sizes and of course our competitors. Welcome all. So the aims of this session is to give you a brief background to Innovate Awarding, talk you through the endpoint assessment journey for the standards I mentioned earlier, give you a closer look at the assessment methodologies identified in the assessment plans, and talk about how we are going to deliver endpoint assessment for these 3 standards. We'll also be talking about our assessment workforce, what will that look like, and giving you some idea about the support that we are going to be providing for our customers. So how will the session run? We will actually be talking excuse me, right up to the hour allotted for this webinar. It's a packed agenda, so we will not have time to answer questions during the session. Please though, do log your questions on the system and we will get back to you with answers after the event. And if there's anything you don't get the chance to ask, then please contact us directly on the details given at the end. But the idea is that the information provided will in fact give you a very clear idea of what the assessment plans look like across these 3 standards. So starting off, a bit about who we are. Innovate Awarding is an independent limited company within the Lifetime Group, and we have been regulated by Ofqual and the equivalents in Wales and Northern Ireland since 2009. We have an independent corporate governance, very important in this world, which enables us to have been registered as an apprenticeship assessment organisation. Just to give you some idea of size, we have registered over 30,000 learners through 2015-16, which puts us in the top 40 of UK awarding organisations. And we do currently offer apprenticeship framework qualifications in a range of sectors. What is endpoint assessment then? Assessment plans are part of the standards designed by employer groups for specific job roles within their industries. The assessments can only be delivered by a registered apprenticeship assessment organisation. Easy to say. There are now 52 organisations approved, ranging from employers to training providers and awarding organisations. The gateway process will be explained by Andy later on, and he'll be talking about the planning meeting which takes place before assessment begins. The assessment for each standard has to have a holistic approach, and it's fair to say that although each standard is different, there are similarities throughout. And the last point on this slide, results are graded, and there is no exception to that, although the grading can be different from standard to standard. So what is our proposition? We aim to have clear and transparent pricing, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on, but prices are now available, and please do contact us if you would like to have a conversation about that. We have level 3 and level 5 qualifications for 2 of the standards in development at the moment. They will be ready in June 2017. And although we will be asking centres to register learners with us on our new IT system, we will be asking them to prepare for the assessments taking place all over the country. So we do need that upfront registration. We are recruiting EPA managers for each sector, and these will be the go-to people for anything relating to their specialist sector. They will be available throughout the learner journey for help and advice on assessment issues. As I say, we are recruiting these people at the moment. The details will be on our website within the next couple of hours. So if anybody would like to apply for one of those posts, please do, and the details will be on our website, as I say. These EPA managers will also be managing our assessor workforce, and Andy will be talking a bit more about that in a minute. Innovate is working on support materials on a phased basis. Some will be available in May and the full set will be ready by October. And you will be able to download the plan for that later on in the presentation. We will be making e-certificates available for each assessment component that is successfully completed by the learners. But of course the final apprenticeship certificate will be generated by the Skills Funding Agency, which Innovate Awarding will be responsible for applying for. A slight difference in process there. So the sectors we are going to go for, we will be applying for around 50 standards in these sectors listed here. I won't go through them all because the presentation will be sent to you and you'll be able to see them in detail there. And we are already approved for 14 of those, for 14 standards within those sectors. We've got another 2 in the pipeline which we're waiting to hear about, and these should be through in a couple of weeks, and these are Senior Chef Production Cooking and Public Service Operational Delivery Officer. Just going to finish my part of this presentation at the front end with a screenshot of our system that we're very proud to be able to show you today. We have the first phase of the user acceptance testing on the 11th of April, after which we can make the system available for piloting. So if anybody's interested in getting involved in that, please get in touch and we'd be very pleased to take you through it. So now I'm going to pass on to Andy to take us through the assessment journey for the 3 standards that you have registered in to here today.
Okay, thanks very much, Kathy, and welcome everyone. As Kathy mentioned, we've got quite a few standards to go through today, and quite a lot of information within each of those assessment plans that we want to try and give you an idea as to how we're going to approach that delivery and what our role is in terms of the endpoint assessment process. Now, clearly the endpoint assessment organisation, the kind of operational role starts once the apprentice has finished their on-programme learning. But our thinking is far advanced, and actually our support and the kind of the role that we can play in the earlier stages of delivery is an important part of what we'll talk about today. Just to give you an indication as to the timelines we're looking at in terms of on-programme learning, with many of these standards starting in May. Customer services, we're looking at a minimum of 12 months. Team leader, 18 months as team leader at level 3, and the operations departmental manager, 2.5 years. So obviously quite different lengths of time, but the thinking is still the same in terms of our support package for the apprentices who will be starting their training, and also in terms of the registration onto our IT system, so that we can make things available and we can start planning in advance. And as Kathy mentioned, the earlier we can register apprentices onto our system, the better. It means we can make support available direct to apprentices, and also to understand locations and plan when we think the assessment scheduling will happen. Now, what we've got on screen here is an indicative endpoint assessment schedule for an apprentice doing customer service, and I'm going to kind of run through these relatively quickly to give you an idea as to what the journey looks like once an apprentice has gone through their on-programme learning. There is no one-size-fits-all here. As you can see, there's no dates applied to the journey itself, and we're very keen to look at the best model approach for our customers. There is some guidance built into the assessment plans as to the order in which these can take place. For instance, you'll see in the customer service practitioner, the apprentice showcase will be assessed before practical observation, and then the professional discussion will take place last. What we haven't got there is an indication as to how long that should take. Now, obviously, in terms of the work that needs to go on, that might differ in terms of the apprentice readiness, and of course the marking of the assessment. But what you'll see here is an indicative kind of journey for the customer service practitioner, right up until the final grade in completion, and then the minimum, the 20-day SLA that is in place for certification from SFA once we have provided that information to them. So moving on, just to give you some further information. Now you'll see within all of these three schedules that a planning meeting is in place, and actually the planning meeting isn't written as standard within these assessment plans as it is in other sectors that are in place. The planning meeting isn't mandatory, but actually as part of our standard kind of activity, we see it as a really important kind of part opportunity for our assessors to make first contact with the apprentice, to talk about the schedule, to talk about how the process is going to work, and also to kind of have early contact and to talk about any issues that the apprentice might have. So really to try and ease that tension and make it as an uncomplicated process as possible. We're not proposing that our assessors are out going and meeting people in the field. We will build into our IT system the capability of running video conferencing where appropriate, and we'll talk to our customers to see the best way that we can approach that. But we see that as quite an important part of what happens. And then again, you'll see that there's one more component element in place here. We're going to talk in detail about all of the component assessments that are in place within the assessment schedule as we go through today. And you'll see here that, again, there's professional discussion, but that takes a slightly different kind of format than what we have in other sectors, and we'll touch on that in detail as well. And then finally, the level 5 assessment standards. Again, an additional component you'll see here. They have on-program learning, as we mentioned, up to 2.5 years. And again, grading and completion at the end of it. And we'll go through what this journey looks like in detail. We'll talk about the component assessments and the approach that we take to the assessment journey and how we support customers, and of course, most importantly, the apprentices through that journey. All of these indicative assessment schedules will be made available very soon. We'll have one for at least one of these, sorry, for each of our standards that we're offering. They will be made available within our marketing literature, and we'll also have other examples of different models that can be approached by our customers. So whilst following the assessment plan guidelines for what order assessments need to be taken and the length of time where that's appropriate, we'll be given different models that can be adopted by our customers in terms of how we best approach the actual assessment journey. So that might be perhaps one assessment after the other, or even an approach to assessment days where more than one assessment will take place in that same day in that same location. But all of those models that we produce will be in line with what the guidance is within the assessment plans, and of course what is an appropriate kind of approach for the apprentice themselves. So for customer service, there is no prerequisite for apprentices who are entering the endpoint assessment journey, other than the on-program learning having taken place and a minimum of 12 months. For level 3 of 5, there are some recommendations in place that have been included within the assessment plan that obviously we will be looking at within our you'll be looking at within the gateway, and the gateway is an important part of the process before the endpoint assessment journey happens, and that's essentially a meeting between the employer, the apprentice, and the training provider to essentially ensure readiness for the endpoint assessment to begin. And you'll be looking at ensuring that where these recommendations are included, that if this is an approach that has been taken, that the apprentice has completed these elements. So, for instance, for team leader, a level 3, and for operations departmental manager, a level 5 diploma in management or equivalent has been taken as part of that on-program learning. And as part of the endpoint assessment journey, if this has taken place, then we would look at elements of this within the assessment components that are in place. There must be regular performance reviews with the apprentice's line manager, and of course these must be recorded. There must be a portfolio of evidence completed, and this will actually be assessed as part of the endpoint assessment journey. And that will need to be transferred over to us from this through this activity, and we'll talk about how that works within the next few slides. There must be feedback from the line manager, from their peers, and also any direct reports that they have. And for level 5, there is a work-based project. Again, something that will need to be transferred over to us. In terms of the assessment process, and there's a lot more to that work-based project that will happen within the assessment itself. Now, on-screen tests, many of the standards that have been developed and assessment plans have been released for will include on-screen tests, but for the purposes of today, it only applies to the team leader and to the operations departmental manager. There is no on-screen test within the customer service standard. Now, all on-screen tests will be externally set and marked by us as the assessment organisation. We will house all of these tests within our bespoke IT system that Kathy touched on within her final slide, and that kind of process of entering the system will be as straightforward as possible to ensure that the apprentice doesn't have to go through a whole heap of steps to be able to log on to that system. Now, those tests will be scheduled, they will be on demand, and they'll be able to be taken either on site or within an assessment centre, as long as that the venue that the assessment is taken in allows for it to be taken under controlled conditions. And of course, Innovate, as part of our kind of policies and procedures, will provide all of our customers with the exact kind of requirements for running on-screen tests. Now, questions will be scenario and situation based. For within this assessment plan, we haven't been told how many questions and the length of time that will need to be applied, so we will be confirming that through a test specification that will be available as early as possible to our customers, which will kind of be will give an indication of what we will be kind of looking for in terms of the criteria that we'll be asking questions upon. We're working on our customer service standards, but for fully on-screen multiple choice question tests, we expect the feedback to be available quickly. And of course, in terms of questions that we're asked often, we're asked about our reset policy, and we will be building in one free reset for multiple choice question tests as standard. So where on-screen testing is included, we will include one free reset. And we also have a strong commitment to supporting the apprentice and preparing them as well as possible to ensure they're given the best opportunity to pass first time. What we've identified is the need for practice questions and full mock papers to be available as early as possible for apprentices. And we go into a lot more detail towards the end of this presentation as to what the support proposition looks like, and we'll also make available a handout to you that will give you that information in more detail. So each of the standards that we're looking at have an element of portfolio of evidence, or within the definitions provided by the customer service apprenticeship standard, they called it an apprentice showcase. Now this will be marked by Innovate, but the compilation of evidence for this activity actually takes place during the on-program learning. And that will be sent through to Innovate for marking by our endpoint assessors. Where existing e-portfolios exist, and we know that many of the colleges, training providers already have existing e-portfolios that will continue to be used for standards delivery. Where they exist, we will ensure that integration is as smooth as possible with our IT system, so those materials can be uploaded for assessment by our assessors. As I said, this actually is kind of a common theme across the standards we're talking about today, where the portfolio of evidence is completed during the on-program learning and is sent through to us. So really important and actually reasonably unique compared to a lot of the other standards that we're looking at. The portfolio of evidence at level 3 and 5 will cover the totality of the standard. And work that can be completed will cover either a number of elements within one kind of piece of work for marking, or discrete elements that relate to the standard. Really nothing new to the way that the portfolio of evidence work now, with the exception of this kind of independent marking that happens during the endpoint assessment process. Examples of things that can be produced: reports, presentations, performance reviews, or observations, but of course we're not limited to that. In the case of the level 2 apprentice showcase, this can be supported by a presentation or a virtual form of assessment, such as a report or a storyboard. And that apprentice showcase will be assessed against an externally set brief set by Innovate that will be available obviously early in the process, and based upon the guidance that's provided within the customer service assessment plan. Okay, moving on and swiftly, as we've got a number of different assessment components to talk through. Level 2 customer service practitioner stands alone as having a practical observation. This will be scheduled in advance. It will be carried out by an independent endpoint assessor sent in by Innovate, say taken in the workplace, and our assessors will work to ensure the most appropriate schedule for this to take place. And where we work with customers who perhaps have a number of customer service apprentices in the same location or in similar locations, we will look at the best delivery model to ensure that perhaps multiple practical observations can take place in the same venue or in the same region within the same time. And we're very keen to talk about delivery models with all of our customers and how best to run multiple sessions where cohorts of apprentices exist. Of course, scheduling must allow for the apprentice to have the best chance to demonstrate all aspects of the standard, and this will of course give them the best chance to achieve a distinction level. But where this is not covered, where elements of the standard cannot be covered through the practical observation, which takes place over the course of 1 hour, that will be covered and discussed as part of the professional discussion, and that kind of helps to explain why the order of the assessment components require the practical observation at level 2 to take place before the professional discussion itself. Innovate will provide our assessors with the appropriate forms to observe the apprentice, Of course we'll score the observation against the grading criteria provided in the assessment plan, and we talk about grading on a slide later in the presentation, which gives you a little bit more detail as to what that looks like. Moving on, again, we're now talking solely about the team leader and the operations departmental manager. There are structured competence-based interviews included within both of these assessment plans. Now, what's quite unique about the assessment plans we're talking about today is they often make reference to encouraging assessment organisations to use virtual assessment technology where appropriate, and that is very much what we would be looking to do. Now, we're not absolutely kind of inflexible to other approaches, and we're very keen to talk to customers about the best way of delivering assessment, and in some cases that might be a face-to-face. But in terms of these assessment plans, it's very clear that actually the employer group is encouraging the use of virtual assessment technology where it is appropriate for the apprentice, and of course we're very keen to look at that, and we'll be building, well, we are building the suitable technology for that to happen with ease and to ensure that the apprentice is as comfortable as possible. The structured competence-based interview will be based on a structured set of questions, which will be developed, for which we will provide examples, and of course Innovate will assess the apprentice's knowledge through these questions. And as I said, it's intended that this interview is conducted virtually, and they've given the employer group has given a number of different examples, from telephone interview, from online video conferencing, amongst other things. Moving on, the professional discussion at level 2, actually, as we talked about, is defined as being the final part of the jigsaw. So it's the part where our assessor will be able to pull on information that has occurred within the other assessment elements and talk about them with the apprentice. The professional discussion is designed to allow the apprentice to demonstrate understanding and application of knowledge, skills and behaviour, taken in a suitable environment, and this could be a meeting room, a closed-off space within the employer's premises, but it must be kind of a comfortable environment for the apprentice to have a one-on-one discussion with the independent endpoint assessor provided by Innovate. And again, much like the practical observation and the other elements of the assessment plan for customer service, the discussion will be set against criteria that's included within the occupational brief. And again, our support will provide guidance as to how that will happen and what we'll be covering within those discussions. As for the way the professional discussion will happen, it will last a maximum of 1 hour, much like practical observation. The discussion will clarify questions the assessor has had based on those past assessments. The assessor will use it to confirm and validate judgments, and discuss how an apprentice will behave in situations that perhaps they've not covered in that practical observation. It will also give the assessor a chance to ask questions related to personal development as part of their on-programme learning, and of course provide a basis for making that final grading decision. Okay, so there's the professional discussion within the team leader and the level 5 standard takes on a slightly different focus to many of the other professional discussions that are available in other standards so far. It's actually a much smaller element of the overall assessment journey than in those standards, where professional discussions are often the focal point, or at least the final kind of endpoint of the endpoint assessment journey, that often ties together what the apprentice has done during their assessment. The focus here is actually on CPD and additional learning. And of course, our assessors will need to understand exactly what it is the apprentice has covered, and this, will require a great deal of upfront kind of thinking from our assessor, and looking at whether the apprentice has taken a specific qualification, whether they've done any formal, informal learning. And of course, elements that have come through the portfolio that was uploaded as part of the one of the assessment components. The assessor themselves will look at what the objective of the activity was, the outcome of that learning, and then how that learning was applied. And when we look at the weighting that's been applied to the professional discussion for these two assessment plans, what we'll see is that actually that weighting is significantly lower than perhaps has been included within many other standards that we deliver to date. Okay, so for level 5 only, and I hope you're following where the assessment components relate to here. And apologies, it is kind of we've got some assessment components that are in everything, and of course some that are just solely in one apprenticeship standard. The work-based project is an element that will take place towards the final part of the 2.5-year apprenticeship on programme learning, and the recommendation here is around about the final 6 months of the on-programme learning, and there will be significant kind of support built in from the training provider and the employer to be able to support the apprentice at level 5 to be able to develop an appropriate project here. The project itself is one that represents skills, knowledge and behaviours in the standard. It needs to be business related, and it will demonstrate within that business scenario the application of those skills and knowledge. Each project itself must enable these elements to be demonstrated. The application of the knowledge and skills to meet the outcomes in the standard, the approach to planning and the completion of the project, and also the application of behaviours from the standard itself. The project will need that we ask for will be applicable to any business and will be agreed, as we kind of intimated before, by the employer, the training provider and the apprentice, that it's achievable in their business constraints and of course meets the standard. So there's an important part here to be played by the employer and the training provider to ensure that the apprentice is set up. And of course, guidance that we produce as an assessment organisation will support both the employer and the training provider in being able to do this. There are a number of other guidelines that we will need our customers to adhere to, and of course, within our assessment guidance that we provide, we will set out what those are. And there's a lot here that we will obviously be producing as part of our kind of overall proposition. The completed project work will be submitted to Innovate, to our endpoint assessor, who will essentially assess and ensure that it demonstrates competence across the apprenticeship standard. Now, following on from the work-based project, there will be a presentation that focuses on the outcomes of that project. It will be given to a panel which will comprise the independent assessor, the training provider and the employer, and it's quite unique in terms of continuing to include the training provider in the endpoint assessment journey. and actually the final decision will be made in terms of the grading by the endpoint assessor. It's important to note that here. The presentation itself will be 15 minutes, and it will describe the objectives and the outputs of the work-based project, and we'll need to demonstrate what the apprentice has set out to achieve, what have they produced in their project, how have they approached their work, and how they have dealt with any issues, and it will also confirm the demonstration of appropriate interpersonal and behavioural skills that are included within the standard itself. In terms of the practical requirements, the presentation will obviously take place following the completion of the project and the preparation of the final report. The apprentice will be given a minimum of 7 days notice by Innovate, and scheduling will be quite an important part in terms of working with customers to ensure that that scheduling is done in advance and works with obviously business constraints. We will provide a structured brief which will be used to support the presentation and will obviously ensure a consistent approach is taken by all apprentices who will be part of this endpoint assessment, and of course it will be taken in front of a panel as we talked about. Now there is also a question and answer session which will happen with the panel, and that can be face-to-face or via live media, as is the approach that we talked about earlier. And again, 15 minutes is applied to that question and answer session. Now the apprentice will be asked to provide responses to competency-based questions put to them by the panel members, and the questions will require the apprentice to draw on their experiences throughout their apprenticeship, but also focuses in on the findings and recommendations that have been made within their work-based project activity. So as you can see here, this is quite an important part of the assessment itself, and one which has a number of different sub-elements that will be looked at by Innovate. Now we're actually moving forward quite quickly through this, so I think we're coming towards the end of the session. Well, we have a few slides left, so I think we're doing well for time. So what I'm going to talk about next looks at the grading principles that will be taken by Innovate and applied for each of the assessments that we're looking at. So it's worth just noting a few things here. Each of these grading elements will look at a weighted approach to the assessment. So not every assessment is worth the same amount in terms of how it affects the final grade. What I'm going to try and do is just to give you some examples here. So, for example, what we see in the customer service is that the weighting of the apprentice showcase, which was obviously completed during the 12 months and then passed over to us for assessment, is 65%, so a large percentage of what we're looking at. And when it says to achieve a pass of 100%, that is essentially to meet all of the pass criteria. And then what we've got here is the practical observation and the professional discussion having a slightly smaller weighting approach. Now the final grade, there is actually a little bit of, in my view, contradictory information within the assessment plan. But the final grade will be based. The apprentice must achieve a minimum pass threshold in each of the assessment components, and the final grade will be based on the weighted average of these end assessment components. And what you've got there is what the minimums are in terms of achieving a distinction for each of the component elements here. Again, criteria for customer service will be how we make those judgments. So a slightly different approach when we're looking at the level 3 and level 5 standards, which does have a weighted approach, but has allocated marks attached to each, which allow us to score and then grade based on the apprentice achieving a certain score. So starting from the back, working to the front, you'll see that to achieve a distinction, an apprentice must achieve for team lead supervisor over 70 out of 100. And you'll see here the way that the employer group has looked at the weighting. The knowledge test and the competency-based interview has a greater weighting than the portfolio and the professional discussion. So it's worth kind of understanding the different approaches here and obviously how we will look at it in terms of our final scoring. And as I mentioned before, the slightly lesser weighting to the professional discussion is quite unique for this sector, and you'll see that for operations departmental manager, it is actually only 10% of the weighting, and the final mark is only 10 out of the 100. So still a really important component, but different to perhaps for those of you who deliver multiple standards. It's really worth kind of understanding the way that the different approaches have been taken within the assessment plans themselves. So hopefully that makes sense. Obviously we have to, as the assessment organisation, adopt this approach, and we'll provide the appropriate guidance to you as customers that will help you understand how we grade. And as part of our support, we'll also show examples of graded work to really give you an idea as to what the difference is and what we'll be looking at in different scenarios. Okay, so let's move on and just try and get rid of this on my screen here. Just bear with me 1 minute. That's it. Okay, so we've talked about what the assessment looks like. We've talked about how we grade the assessment, and we've talked about the endpoint assessor quite a lot. But actually what we need to do now is just tell you a bit about what our assessment workforce looks like. And before I move into that, what I'd like to say is that obviously we will be appointing a number of assessors to support all of the standards that we will be delivering. We're very interested to hear from people who would be interested in working in this environment. What I'll do is I will tell you what an assessor looks like, what we'll be looking for, and again, if it's something that appeals to you moving forward, we're very keen to hear from you with your CV and a little bit about yourself through to the email address that we'll provide at the end, so that we can start. We're going to be looking to start the recruitment process very soon, so that we can provide the appropriate training, standardisation, and have our workforce in place in good time so that we can start delivering these endpoint assessments that we've talked through today. So what does an assessor look like? And this applies for a number of standards, not just the what we've looked at today. They're independent, they're fair and impartial. They understand the sector. This is really important. It's not just assessment experience, it's understanding and occupational competence within the sector. And an example of this from customer service is the requirement to have 2+ years working in a customer service environment. All of our assessors will have no direct relationship with the apprentice until the endpoint assessment journey starts. This is a really important factor within these new standards. We are an independent organisation, and our actual approach to assessment won't start until the gateway has been passed. That doesn't mean that we can't provide support, we can't provide interaction. It just means that the assessor who will be assessing the allocated apprentice can't have that contact until we move through the assessment journey. All of our assessors will have to have the appropriate assessment qualifications, the appropriate assessment experience, and for the higher level standards we've talked about today, they must have experience in leadership and management within a range of organisations, and also have hold a relevant qualification. And again, all of this information we'll provide is also within the assessment plans that are available now. They also must have experience as a professional manager. They may well have professional body status as well. And we've talked about a number of assessment approaches that include a great deal of interaction between the assessor and the apprentice themselves. So they must be a great communicator. They must be able to manage quite complex assessments, such as professional discussions, competency-based interviews. And I would also add to the list here that they will have to have the ability to work with technology when they're running these assessments, perhaps through virtual assessment, as we've talked about through the presentation today. Okay, so the final slide from me, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to make available a handout, which is hopefully is available to you now. That's not what I wanted to do. So the handout should be available to you.